Imagine this. You shake hands on a deal, a big real estate deal. But instead of getting the keys, you get a court summons. We're going to unpack a truly wild story today, one that starts with a simple promise and spirals into this massive 9-figure judgment. It's an incredible look at what happens when trust just completely shatters.
Okay, let that number sink in for a second. 97.5 million new Taiwan dollars. That's around 3 million US dollars. And nope, that's not a lottery jackpot. That is the final amount the Taiwan Supreme Court ordered a group of sellers to pay a buyer, all because a land deal went completely disastrously sideways.
So, the big question is, how? How on earth does a pretty standard land deal blow up into a penalty this enormous? Well, it's a story of broken trust, some really clever contract writing, and a court system trying its best to figure out what's fair. All right, let's dive in and see how it all went down. You know, this whole thing wasn't a quick dispute. It unfolded over more than a decade. It starts simply enough back in 2010. But then look at 2011. The buyer puts down a huge upfront payment, $65 million. That's almost the whole price. So you'd think the deal is done, right? Wrong. Fast forward to 2014, and the sellers, instead of handing over the land, go and mortgage it to a bank for even more money. Then, after the buyer finds out and cancels the contract, get this, in 2018, the sellers sell that very same land to a totally different company. I mean, it is just a complete and utter mess that took years in court to finally sort out.
And, to be fair, the deal was kind of complicated from the get-go. See, the 4 sellers, they didn't even own the whole plot of land. There was a 5th co-owner, and they had to buy that person's share first before they could sell it. So this early little hiccup, it was really a sign of the tangled mess that was about to come. Okay, and this quote right here, this is the absolute heart of the entire case. This is the promise. When the buyer handed over that $65 million, it was because they signed a new agreement with these exact words in it. The sellers promised point blank that they wouldn't mortgage it, sell it, or do anything else with the land. They took the money and they made a promise. It really couldn't be clearer. I mean, just look at the difference here. The promise was simple: transfer the land to the buyer. But the reality? Whoa. They mortgaged the land to a bank, and then they sold it to someone else. They didn't just break the promise, they completely shattered it. They used the land for their own financial gain twice. It's just a textbook open and shut breach of contract. So, okay, the contract is clearly broken. The buyer has been seriously wronged, and his money is tied up. So what does he do? He goes to court. And what he asks for? Well, this is where the numbers get really, really big. He didn't just ask for his money back. Oh no, he sued for double. You see, the contract they signed had this penalty clause, and it basically said if the sellers back out, they have to return all the money plus pay that same amount again as a penalty. So he asked for a $65 million back and another $65 million on top. That's a grand total of $130 million. Now, this whole double your money back thing, it has a fancy legal name. It's called liquidated damages. The whole idea is actually pretty smart. Instead of having to go to court and prove exactly how much damage you suffered later on, you just agree on a penalty number right at the beginning, in the contract itself. It's supposed to make things simpler and avoid arguments down the road. So the court looked at all this and said, yep, the sellers were 100% at fault, no question. They definitely broke the contract. But, and this is a big but, the judges hit the brakes when they looked at the penalty. They basically asked, okay, getting your $65 million back makes sense, but another $65 million on top of that? Is that really fair? Or is that just way too much? To really get what the court was thinking, let's use a simple analogy. Think about a library book. Default interest, that's like the standard 5 cents a day late fee. It's set by the rules, it's automatic. But liquidated damages, that's different. That's like if you borrowed a super rare, one-of-a-kind book and you sign a special agreement saying, if I'm late with this book, I'll pay $100 a day. Now here's the crucial part. Look at that last row. A judge can't change the standard 5-cent fine. But that $100 a day penalty, a judge can absolutely look at that and say, whoa, that's way too high, and decide to lower it. And that is exactly what the High Court did here. They pointed to a specific rule, Article 252 of the Civil Code, which basically gives them the power to do this. They said, look, doubling the money is just too much. They understood the buyer had losses for sure, but they decided to pull out their, judicial scissors and snip that penalty down to something they felt was more reasonable. And the impact of that decision was massive. The buyer wanted a penalty of $65 million. The court came back and said, nope, that's too steep, and they cut it right down the middle, slashed it exactly in half, down to $32.5 million. So let's put all the pieces together and see how we get back to that number from the very beginning. The court ordered the sellers to return the original $65 million payment, then they tacked on the reduced penalty of $32.5 million. You add those two up, and there it is, $97.5 million. And that's not even counting the 5% annual interest on top of it. This decision went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and they said, yep, this is the right number, final answer.
Okay, wow. That is a wild ride with some absolutely massive numbers. But what does this whole high-stakes legal drama really mean for you and me? Well, it turns out this case has some incredibly valuable practical lessons for pretty much anyone who ever has to sign a contract. So here are the big takeaways. First, define your terms and be super specific. If you want a penalty to be a pure punishment, you have to spell that out. Otherwise, the law just assumes it's to cover damages. Second, and this is a big one, know that the court has power. Just because you and the other party agree on a penalty doesn't make it absolute. A judge can and often will reduce it if they think it's excessive. And third, and maybe most importantly, document everything. The whole reason we know what happened here is because of a paper trail of contracts, agreements, and even certified letters. That stuff is gold in a dispute.
And this whole thing leaves us with a really fascinating and kind of tricky final question. The court stepped in and literally cut an agreed-upon penalty in half. So, was that fair? Were they protecting the sellers from a ridiculously high penalty? Or were they stepping on the freedom of two parties to make their own deal? It really gets to the heart of the balance between what's written in a contract and what's considered just. Something to think about.